My apologies for the interruption. Now, what I'm going to do is glue base this, and just a tiny spot of glue on each notch. And I can do that on this one because this one is going to be ironed out towards the curve. So then I'm going to place each notch together and just press that glue there, and to hold it for the time being I'm going to put a little clip on it. This is washable glue. It won't get in the way of your needle because it's not actually in the seam, it's just on my notches. And I found I had a better result doing it this way than with the different ways I pinned, because this piece is so small. It was a little bit tricky to hang on to. So put a clip on that, and then I'm also going to put a tiny drop of glue on the end, and if I do it on the very dark blue you'll be able to see how small a spot I'm talking about. That's probably too much, and that is going to be in my seam allowance. It won't come anywhere near my needle. Just squeeze them together, put that on to hold it. Same for this side, just a tiny bit, and squeeze them together. Now that allows me to manipulate my fabric around much more easy to get this curve than if I've got a lot of pins in the way, because it's quite a small piece of fabric there, as you can see. Basically just that 1/4 inch seam. Okay. Now take my needle up. As before I said to you I had to make a change, so on my machine, on my FAF, it's 0.0, so I'm going to move my needle across 2 positions, which I'm going to change it to 0.5. It's basically 2 thread widths across. I just needed that little bit extra, whoops, to maintain my points. So I'll start taking those off now. They should be dry, and pop under my first bit. So I'm doing basically a scant 1/4 inch for this one, and I'll use my stiletto as well to do the curves in between. So the glue is holding those notches together really nicely for me, and that allows me not to worry about them while I make sure that the underneath seams are all good. Take your time, go slow. I'm going to put my needle down again, I forgot to do that. Work your way round. It's a very gentle curve, it's not actually hard, and if you do have some glue based, as I said, just use a tiny amount on the notches, and it really makes it so much easier than having all those pins that you're trying to get out of your way and still keep them where your notches are, that type of thing. I did most of them with pins, and then I thought, well, hang on a minute, I can use the glue base because that seam is getting pressed one way. And that seam that I did with the glue basting looked much neater to me. Just making sure my notches didn't get all bunched up there. Take out those last couple of pins. I generally leave the clips on for a little while just to make sure the glue baste is dry. It doesn't take long. as long as you only use a small amount. Now, I think when I did that, I accidentally pushed that over a bit, but I don't think it's going to matter. Just that last little bit. It's just come over a tiny little bit, but that's fine. So there's my seam. Hang on, just get rid of this. So you can see the seam with the dark fabric that I've got there. And at the back, there it is there. And so it's quite a small amount of fabric. Now, all I need to do now is just set that seam. And then I'm going to roll it back this way with my fingers. And it looks pretty good. And I'm going to just dry press it first so I can have a look at it. Now, I do have a little bit of overhang here that shouldn't be there, and I am going to trim that the same as the other side. It's just a smidgen, and it'll just make it easier for me to trim it to match, because I definitely don't want to unpick. Now, that's looking quite good, and I've got a nice point here. I've almost got a point there, not quite, and one there, but good enough. So I'll give it a bit of steam, set it in place. So now is the time when A comes into its own. So we have this one, you see this one like this with A on it, and we're going to do this one exactly the same so that we can make another half, and I'll show you how they go together. So we can get rid of this sticker, we don't need that anymore, and we're going to place A beside it. Well, let me put it on the white so you can see. Place A beside it, and you can see there are 2 notches here, 2 notches here, and we just match up those notches. Flip it over, and because there are a few seams on the back, I'm going to have A underneath for this one. Now I need to change my seam width back to the normal one now that I've done that curve, so I'm back to my normal 1/4 inch seam now. If I had forgotten that, I could just put it back, sew it again, and then pull out the other row of stitching. Right, so lining up, if you want to, you can pop a pin in, but I didn't find it was necessary because it's a fairly easy straight seam with the 2 notches. Sometimes though, when you go to put it under, of course, because it's thin underneath, it wants to go across a bit. So just make sure you've got it. If necessary, get your stiletto to make sure you're keeping it straight. Now I'm using my stiletto to hold down these seams to make sure I don't bump any up. I could also use my purple thing if I needed to, either end, the 1/4 inch measurer or this one. Now if you're not sure if you're using a 1/4 inch, this purple thing has a 1/4 inch measure on it, so you can check. And if you want a scant 1/4 inch, it needs to cover your sewing if you want a scant 1/4 inch. Let's get that over. Remember, even if you get excited because you're right near the end of it, don't rush, because it takes longer to unpick and redo. And I'm actually quite happy with my Mariner's Compass, even though they're not perfect. I've never done them before and always thought, oh, I really want to do that, but I'd only ever seen them paper pieced. I'd never seen them done any other way. And I didn't find the instructions too hard to follow. I would recommend that you watch the AccuQuilt video. It's very good. Oh, there's actually more than one. They're very good. I just thought that I could help you try this out if you were thinking you wanted to buy the die, or if you already had the die. So at the back here, I'm hoping you can maybe see, get my finger out of the way. There's one of your little seams there, which is what I wanted to look at to make sure that I didn't go right in here, because otherwise I'll lose my point on my little thing over there, and I'll show you when I turn over. When I turn it over, there's my point there, and I still have that nice point there at the bottom of my small triangle. Now I'm quite happy with that, so I'm going to press it, set it, and I'm just going to open that seam again. And you've got quite a few little bits and pieces here. Sorry, my throat's going again. And do the front. Oh dear. I'm sorry. And then the last step is to join these two together. You've got your notches so that it looks like this. And then you just place them like that, flip it over, stitch one side, stitch the other side, 2 straight seams, and then you will end up with your Mariner's Compass. And then you can decide about what you're doing with the circle after. Right, I'll see if I can stitch those without coughing again. I've been having trouble with my allergies. Alright, so there's one half, so let's join these together to make another half. Looking at my notches. It does look a bit awkward, but it's quite an easy straight seam. Just make sure you match those notches and check that your seam's underneath are flat. And I always hope at the end that my skinny little seams along the outside are going to match well, because they're always tricky, those little skinny ones. Right, the moment of truth. Did I match or did I not? Not completely as good as it should be. You can see that's a tricky seam to get matched, that one. It's so little, but I think it'll be okay once I've pressed it. So again, we're going to set the seam, open it, press it open, and I need a little bit more steam for this one now that we're getting a bit bulky. We'll flip it over, and I don't think I need to resew it. I think that when I join this to whatever it's being joined to, that's actually within that quarter inch seam here where you will be joining it to sashing or whatever it may be, so you won't actually see that little lumpy bit there. And I think that'll work quite well. The point doesn't look too bad actually. My trick will be to not lose my point when I actually put it together with something else. Now I have my two halves, one half, the other half. Now I put them over, and we want to join both sides. It looks a bit unco to start with, but just do one and then go and do the other. That's what I'm going to do now, hoping that I'm not going to have another coughing and sneezing fit. Checking my notches again and making sure that underneath is straight. I'll grab my stiletto to help me with those notches. Now that wanted to lump up a bit, that multiple seam, so I'm just holding it down, keeping my notches together. And now I need to check my ends to make sure they match. So they do have little, like, they're not exactly straight on the end, they do have little cut off pieces that you match up. See how I went with that one. If it's near enough, I'm happy, because I know that it will be not as good as the other one, but really only about a half a stitch off. Alright, let's press that one. Put it open. And you can see why you didn't put A on until after you did that corner, because A actually comes into there to make its point. And if you hadn't put that on, it would be very tricky to get A. I've just ironed up some other seams which I thought were nice and flat before. Right, let's check the front. I can live with that, it's not too bad. Now we've just got that last one to do. Line up your notches again. Now you can start from this end, which is the outside end, but I do prefer to start from this end because that tends to get a bit caught up under the foot. Now, if you find this a little bit awkward for this one, then you can pop a pin in. But I'm pretty sure it's okay. I'm just going to get 1 or 2 stitches and then I'll readjust now that I know I've got hold of it. Make sure my notches are matching, my first notch. You only need to worry about 1 notch at a time. If you've got the first notch, then you go and worry about the next notch. Alright, matching up the second one and making sure that my seam underneath is flat, because that's a little bit bulky there. And maybe I'll get lucky and have a really good seam at the end. So matching up the second notch and just checking my end again. As far as I can tell, it's good. Now obviously it takes a while to do the whole block. I would say this one took me less than the first one. It's certainly not a block that I would rush. I probably could do another stitch on that, but we'll see how it goes. Sometimes when it comes to the end here, you may find that you have done a little bit less than a 1/4 inch and you might need to run up again to catch that in. But I'll see what it looks like, and if it's okay, I'll just leave it. I'm not expecting it to be perfect, but it's nice to have things finished and looking pretty good. And you know, even if it wasn't very great, I'd just be like, well, okay, that's a learning curve. You know, the next one will be better. Oh, that's why I don't use steam when I'm doing that. Didn't follow my own rule about keeping my fingers out of the way. All right, there we go. And it's not actually looking too bad. So there it is. The finished, almost finished, Mariner's Compass. The next step would be the circle in the middle. That can be any colour you like. I just happen to pick these colours. And that circle could be appliqued by, you know, turning it under. You could put it on with Visifix, raw edge applique, zigzag. You could do it the other way with the interfacing, where you sew a circle of interfacing to it, then put a slit in the interfacing and turn it out the right way, and then just stitch around either by hand or by machine. But I think it's quite a nice block and well worth the trouble. Thank you for listening.